Good afternoon, dear colleagues and friends. Thank you very much for coming back to our Settimana. We are continuing with our topic of the morning with merchants and financial operators. We will have 3 papers. Afterwards, we will have a short coffee break of 20 minutes, and then we hope to come in a wonderful discussion. The first of our 3 papers is from Maria Dolores Lopez and Sari Yehuda Nazar from the University of Barcelona on the topic Managing Risk in 15th Century Barcelona, the Insurance Practices of the Merchant Juan de Torralba. It's your floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the presentation. No. Does it work? No. Now it works. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentation. And yes, indeed, I will present the paper that we have prepared with Maria Dolores Lopez Perez. And it's concerning the risk in the 15th century with a special focus on Barcelona and in general in Crown of Aragon. And I guess I haven't said good afternoon y buona tarde a tothom. That's very bad of me. So this presentation, the outline of the presentation, it's quite easy. So it's a little bit of the introduction, who was Joan de Torralba, and precisely because this is the main source where we take all the information from. Then we have the working hypothesis and the methodology we used, an empirical analysis, precisely the analysis of the whole bank of the data set, just only one part. I will disclose that later. On the insurance that we have preserved in the Archivo Nacional de Catalunya, and regression and fundings, and some general conclusions. So, who was Joan de Torralba? Joan de Torralba was one of the quite important, I would say, and quite big merchant in the Crown of Aragon at the early 15th century. He was born in the late 14th century. We do not have exact date when he was born, but we know where he was born, precisely in Torralba de Ribota. It's like a small village next to Calatayud. Calatayud had a very important position within the fair network, within the kingdom of the Aragon, not the Crown of Aragon, and lately in the Crown of Aragon, so it depends directly on which time exactly, in which century we take 14 and 15. Then probably he moved to Zaragoza. We have the statements that he lived there. We have some information about his basic and initial company, so he was there. And the major funding, and very interesting funding, that when he came to Barcelona, he settles permanently in Barcelona in 1405, and then in 1412 he granted a citizenship. We know that he already came to Barcelona a formed merchant, so he was not an apprentice, he was already a merchant, already knowing how to take care of his ledger and his journals, and that's the legacy that we have. And I will comment on that in a moment. Then from the 4010 to 4040, he's an active within being a part of the company, being one of the equity owners within the companies that he always created with his partners from the Aragonese origin. So they're in almost all the cases from Zaragoza. From 25 to 47, we have 5 successive companies generally contributing almost half of all the capital. And what we take this information from all the active constitutions, because we have all the constitutional acts of creation of all his companies that are preserved in notarial archives. Then starting from the 1447, final company is liquidated, and he starts his solo trade. In this case, it's very important to see that, because previously he conducted a solo, his own business, being a part of the company, so he divided his business activity. But the very important thing that only from 1447 he started to convert himself a bit into what's merchant banker. That's what would be a little bit more typical for let's say, Italian economic zone. And in 1458 he dies, and then there's a huge study that already conducted by Professor Dolores Lopez about how we got the archive and how we got the fund of Torralba and how we got all the documentation. So when we're speaking about the Torralba fund, we're speaking about the 13 exceptionally preserved accounting books, being ledgers journals and being receipt books, and just 2 cases from all the 13 books that are preserved in an archive. So they just survived during all these centuries, and we have a fund of almost 3,185 to be extremely precise of the private letters. So we're speaking about the letters, in the both case, we're speaking about the commercial letters and we're speaking about the private letters. So from the both sides, it's extremely important. For this research, for this paper that we're presenting today, we used only 2 journals, not manuals, journals, exactly, manual, what we call in Catalan manuals, or in Castellano manuales. We didn't use the ledgers, so we didn't use libro mayor or llibre mayor. We used 2 manuals. The first of them, it's Manual 11, it's precisely the 11th journal of Torralba, and the 12th journal of Torralba. So that's the photos. That's how he kept his manuals, and obviously for, I guess, maybe it's quite unnecessary even to say that posteriori, when having a journal, they rewrite all the information into the ledgers, being a main document of the accounting. In this case, one thing that I would happily to announce that precisely this last year we have discovered an additional ledger within the fund, and precisely this year we have structurally studied and justified the using of the double accounting entry, especially by him. But as that's not the topic of the presentation, I just made a disclaimer. The working hypothesis. First of all, when we're speaking about the Joan de Torralba, he operated within a business model that was characterized by high degree of strategic responsiveness. So when we're speaking about the Barcelona of the 15th century, precisely the first half, before the Civil War, the Guerra Civil Catalana, we're speaking about the Barcelona as one of the ambience with a high degree of strategic responsiveness. So in this case, we're speaking about the dynamic optimization, we're speaking about the strategic adaptability that the Barcelona showed and all the merchants from Barcelona showed, that one, and we're speaking about the business rationality, because all the fund of the companies that within our group we conducted the research, going through archive, Archivo Históric de la Ciutat de Barcelona, Archivo Nacional de Catalunya, Archivo de Corona de Aragón, all the other information about the thousands of merchants and the information that we have about them, that's something that we will justify later in the presentation. Barcelona had, by the final decades of the 14th and the first half of the 15th century, as a central node for trans-Mediterranean commercial network, but in this case, very heavily linked to what is the insurance market. In this case, the competence which come from the Mallorca, from Palma de Mallorca, precisely being as the one of the earliest square of the insurance contracts, and that's where we have a debate with Italy as being Mallorca, Genoa, or Florencia. And the third one is precisely the Torralba's engagement within the insurance market. So in this case, we see, first of all, the stress that I will be making this day, something that was inspired by Avner Grave in all his seminal works. I can't just state one. It's all the part of the informal institution, how they played a crucial role in how the insurance in general established. And when we're speaking about the formal establishment, here I would love to highlight that in 1435, the Barcelona was the first city where on the formalized institution level, the insurance contract were formalized within the what was called the city assembly or the city hall. So the overlapping of the kinship, sociability networks, which was based obviously on trust in the initial case, when we're speaking about the 14th, 15th century, that was a facilitator in this case, as the parameter, as we call that in econometrics, for financial intermediation. The methodological framework is quite, in this case, it was the blend of the qualitative and quantitative methods, and I guess this is the most beautiful thing that we can find in economic history, when the qualitative analysis with the sources blends with the reconstruction of the capital flow and quantifying the risk, because we were able to quantify not just the premium that was stated, but the real, I'm so sorry, ganancia. I'm so sorry. Sometimes gaining. I have like overlaps with all my mobile languages, and the first one in general is Hebrew, even not in Spanish. But okay, so, and quantifying that, so an analytical focus in this case is what we would stress in this presentation, and we develop a little bit more in the paper, so if someone has a question, we will gladly to answer, is the geographic and the functional scope, because interesting things, after applying an econometric analysis, we can find how exactly the premium work. And the disclaimer would be that a lot of people would say it has to depend on the distance. No, it has not, and it did not depend on the distance. So distance was not the crucial within the system. And all the digital tool, mapping and making a network analysis of all the people that we can extract precisely from the contracts. The one thing that I have not said, it's that we have an original insurance contract. That's one thing that we have within the, like, as we call that in Spanish, cajas, so like boxes when you go to the archive. And we have 5 original contracts. 3 of them, they were signed in Mallorca, and 2 of them, they were signed in Barcelona. So the interpretive goal within the interpretation is to reconstruct risk sharing, so detect insurance, how it worked within the network circle as multi-agent exposure distribution. So does the modern theory, how from the point of view of the economic theory we do explain that, and how we apply the econometrics directly to this, to assess institutional role, in this case, precisely the informal institution based on the tradition of the new institutional economics, and trust and rationality, how they cope together. Because when we speak about the agent of the 15th century, when we speak about the merchants of the 15th century, we're speaking about the rational agent, because we're speaking about the economic agent. The context is absolutely different, so obviously there will be a question about the role of the church, how they evaded usury, and all these things. That's true. But in any case, as it could be quantified, because we need something a little bit more formalized to justify that, to make a little bit more solid basis, precisely the connection between the justification of them being as a rational agent and the insurance contract, we can observe that, and we can actually observe that in a very beautiful way from the economic point of view. So the empirical analysis per se, what we have. When we're speaking about these 2 journals, we're speaking about the journal that relevant 61 of the cases being an insured party, and only in 38% being in the insurer. But as I said, and as I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, that from the 1447, when he became a solo trader, and he became just a merchant banker, we see the drastic change. Because in 16 new contracts that we extract from his lost ledger and the brilliant ledger that complies all what we looking for in the Venetian style of the double entry, and I always say that extremely proudly, appears more new 16 contracts, and almost in all cases he's an insurer. He participates in the insurer part, so he's not the insured one. The volume activity extracted from these 2 journals, we have 195 insurance contracts or insurance cases, as we say that, because not of all of them they're contracts directly. So that's the trap when extracting this information about the insurance cases from the accounting books or from any accounting source. Extended data sets on it contains 253 total cases, including final decade of activity, and they're documented in these 2 sources. So what we have, yes, absolutely correct. So some preliminary or first fundings that we can find. First of all, we're speaking about the risk and capital allocation. Assuming the role of being the insurer, not the insured party, economically speaking, we're saying that participating in the multi-party underwriting structure, so it's co-insurance, we're speaking about that the logic of the merchants from the Crown of Aragon, it's from the profit-oriented, it's the profit-oriented almost always, rather than risk-averse. So we're not speaking about the version of the risk. We're speaking about that I need a profit. So I'm trying to make a manipulation with the market and find where I can get money. So that was the point number 1. So example in this case, it's quite trivial what I'm saying, but like I guess everyone knows that insurance is it was a risk transfer, but in the same case it was investment strategy. And Joan de Torralba gives us an example where we can quantify that and we can see that, we can identify that basically from the historical methodology, because we have the primary source. So we have the original book. We're not making assumptions. So that speaks about, first of all, the expected utility theory that's applied perfectly when we're speaking about the analysis of the insurance activity of Joan de Torralba. We're speaking about the risk premium margins because we can calculate them, because we have the data and we have the percentage and we have the quantity. And we speak about the risk pricing and the profitability, that we can find in his private notes, because we have his private notes. So this one is precisely the network that we depicted. I guess it's not very well seen on the slide about the interest and incoming flows. That's the flows that he was as the insurer during the activity, and the outgoing flow, it's where he is as insured party. So, geographical scope, the majority of contracts that issued in Barcelona, only with a few cases in Mallorca. We're speaking about the early years risk hedging, and the later years, we're speaking about the income via premiums, we're speaking about the underwriting risk for others. So in this case, we have the top 6, and I guess I will show this one better, the percentage distribution of the destination, and here where the beautiful thing comes, and how the insurance played in that. So we see that the major part of all the insurance comes to Pisa, Repubblica Florentina, Venice, Barcelona, Ragusa, Palermo, etc. So this is all the representation of all the markets where in general the commercial activity of Joan de Torralba, where in general he was presented. In this case, what's interesting and what's quite, I would say, fascinating, if I can, yes, I will give you a moment to take, no problem. It's always appreciated. But what we can see, so when we apply the basic statistic to the data set, we have some like the maximum premiums, 135 pound of Barcelona, then we have the minimum. The most common destination is Pisa, as I already said. But what is interesting in this one. So when we have the 195 contracts, we have the 73% of them with the insured amount, where we have clearly the amount that are insured, so we have the quantity, and then we have 93% of them where we have the premium specified. So only when we have the overlap between what's insured amount in the premium, that's the place where the Clametrics in general can play. So we have more solid conclusion. So the major of them made in Catalan pounds, only 2 transactions we have in Florentine Florin, then we have an average premium of 8.3 Libra the pound of Barcelona. We have the outliers, we have the minimum one as the insured amount of 1 so and 6 denarius, and the biggest one that would be precisely with Venice, in this case 1,517 pounds of Barcelona. So what's happening? The OLC modern regression was used. This is the basic things for if someone has a question how it was econometrically conducted. So we have the strong explanatory power, we have statistically robust data set, and we have some results. So the interesting things, I just will recall one thing, that we see that in the top 6, in the top we have Barcelona, we have Pisa that is the first one. And what we have as a result of the econometrics, we have that Barcelona, Pisa, and Constantinopolis, they're not statistically significant. But I say that absence of statistical significance, it doesn't mean the absence of logic. Absolutely no. There's no direct correlation between that. But in this case, what we would say is that what I'm saying on the right side, that destination matters. Absolutely correct. The price reflects risk and geography, but it's not that explicit. So what happens is risk aversion, in this case, rate as scale within premium aligns with expected utility. So it depends where the ship goes and what that ship has within. So we're speaking about in this case, we're speaking about the merchandise that we are sending. Then we're speaking about the spatial logic. Risk price was night and uncertainty. Night and uncertainty and the certainty that we cannot calculate. So it's non-calculatable. So when we speak about the Venice, we speak about the high value, long haul, and complex trade, and Ragusa stable, proximate, and diplomatically protected. The conclusion is that no, before the conclusion. The premium amount is a proxy for exposure. So that's, I guess, something that also quite, sometimes I think that I'm saying quite obvious things. So conclusion, in the 15th century market, the pricing followed what we call today in economic theory the convex logic. So the higher the value, the higher the proportional premium. So with Torralba as the just one case, with this merchant, we can justify that, and that was justified using the econometrics. What happens with Venice and Ragusa? Why they do have that outliers within the OLC regression and within the econometrics? So the Venice, what we have, the higher value cargoes. That's number one. So Venice is extremely positive coefficient, may capture not just risk. We're not speaking just about the risk. And even it's a quite, you have to spend more time to go to Venice than to go to Ragusa. Ragusa is like way closer because you don't need to go, let's say, inside the Adriatic Sea. So we're speaking about the high value cargo. We speak about the strategic destination. So we have the greater exposure in this case. Then we have the signaling effect. So the merchant investing and all the trade connected with Venice, all the voyages there, they were seen as a high stakes actors. So that's the main conclusion that we extract from the data set making the econometric regression. And insurance premium may reflect this status, signaling an economic complexity. And that's actually true when we make the preliminary or general basic analysis of the Venice. Its macroeconomic structure, it actually aligns with the general conclusion by Lane, for example, that we made in studying the Venetian economy. When we're speaking about the Ragusa as outliner, but being the negative outliner in the whole, that suggests three things. First of all, it's institutional confidence. The solid notarial system and diplomatic neutrality that could affect, and at the end of the day, the system, precisely when we're speaking about the premium, the embedded commercial presence, and we do have the consulate, we do have the presence of the Catalan merchants there in Ragusa, and I don't want to say that we didn't have them in Venice. And that's what I will say in conclusion. And the possible preferred trading corridor when we're speaking especially about the wool trade, when we're speaking about the wool trade with Ragusa. So in this case, that aligns precisely with this paper that was called por Bertoncini, the amazing one, that especially one of the conclusions is that despite the similar distance, rates would be different. So Alexandria, it's not Constantinople, Pisa, it's not Venice, Ragusa is not Barcelona. So risk pricing was geopolitical, not geographical, in many cases. And the main conclusion, and I guess I'm passing my time and I don't have a bit of time, that's my big drama with the time. So insurance was a dual instrument. On one hand, we're speaking about the protection, on one hand, we're speaking about the profit. And many times when we delve into the literature, we see only part, the studied part, I mean from the economic point of view, only as the protection of their cargoes. That is true when we're speaking about the late years of the insurance practice. The spatial risk pricing, in this case, the market behavior was rational already in the 15th century. It was, and that's very important if we can proceed with creating all this case study from different places to make it small, make the homogeneity between the conquer, and that was in this case, not taking only the case of Torralba. Evolving contractual formalism, the path dependence, and the partial codification. So, the variation in entry format reflects the transition between what's called informal trust-based enforcement into institutional standardization. We have that, and we see that in Barcelona in 4035. So when the formalized and when the state, it's not correct to use for the 15th century, but precisely when the authority, they began to control what is the insurance contract. Gender anomaly, we have very few cases, only two, I guess, if I'm not mistaken, 2 or 3 cases of the woman being an insurer, and I guess it's a very important part and needs further research. The Barcelona was a financial node, the regional innovation and institutional integration was highly fused all together, and the asymmetric intelligence and risk calibration. In this case, also one thing that I sometimes find lacking in the literature of the late medieval insurance study, it's precisely when we make an emphasis of the asymmetric information flow when we're constructing the models. Thank you very much, and I'm deeply sorry for taking that long.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sari, for this very instructive presentation. And now we are coming to our second speech of Maja Zellweger. Maja from the State Archive of St. Gall will speak about risk management of the linen merchants Zellweger vom Drogen in the trading triangle Appenzell-Ausserrhoden, Lyons and Genoa, 1750 to 1820. Maja, it's your floor.
Thank you very much for accepting my paper. I indeed did some researches about the bankruptcy that happened 18 and 17. In 2009, I published this paper, so this day I'm going to talk about risk management, not about the bankruptcy later on. Okay. I need the little machine. I'm sorry.
Machine.
Thank you very much. I'm going to talk about 5 points: exchange of information in business correspondence, the lettre à la maison as qualitative studied by me, and caution, patience, long-term stability as their 3 main principles of risk management. Then, in the 4th point, I'm going to talk about the 2 branches in Genoa, and last but not least, about the 5 companies after 800 and their short and sharp ending. St. Gallen is known to be simply the city of Eastern Switzerland linen trade. In the 18th century, not less than 52 linen trade companies from St. Gallen entertained a branch in the silk metropole Lyon, which has been for centuries their main sales market. SG as the abbreviation for St. Gallen, so you see here the 52s of them. All of them left their names and logos in the books of the Swiss nation in Lyon, but not a single one has left any economical source that would shed light on how their linen trade export was actually organized. Therefore, the substantial remains of the merchants in linen and later on cotton, Zellweger, from this little village Drogen nearby the city St. Gallen in the state Appenzell-Ausserrhoden, organized in a direct democracy, is the great exception. Beyond some single account books, the merchants Zellweger left behind the considerable amount of 15 letter copy books, all written in Drogen. They cover more or less the 2 periods from 1747 to 1718 and from 18 to 1820. And suggesting by that the striking comparison of their risk management before the Industrial Revolution to the time after the turn of the century. These are those 17 trading companies Zellweger, which, as I learned yesterday, are to be called small units, not super companies, but small units companies, because they have been organized by only 2 partners, working the one in Drogen and the other in Lyon. In total, they built up a continental European trading area or network, entertained by writing a minimum of 40,000 business letters to about 4,000 addressees, such as suppliers, customers, freight forwarders, bankers, and finally their own branches in Lyon and Genoa on about 550 different localities. And I'm very proud to show you this map here, because I realized that Fernand Braudel, the founder of this organization here, had come up with the same idea to produce maps with little points on it to grasp the area of merchants. And I went through quite some pain to get this map done. But he didn't have the technical machines to do that at his time. The actual amount of business letter once written in the trading triangle Zellweger can be estimated on at least 200,000, but we don't know about the first half of the 18th century, so also this is just the half of the truth. In comparison, I was able to do some research on their freight forwarders, Salis Masner in Chur, who were responsible for the Transalpine transport. They maintained contact to 4,210 addressees in 465 locations at about the same period. This proves the huge amount of business letters as contemporary standard. Well, I don't have to point out this here in Prato, where I know that Dattini has left 140,000 letters by himself. Let me just point out to the fact that the number of business partners, letters and localities after 800 were considerably higher than before 1718, although the period examined was more than 10 years shorter. These findings show surprisingly the huge effort of the fourth generation, who is often observed to show some decline in strength and willpower by living exclusively on the heritage. This was obviously not the case in Trogen, and an astonishingly founding. Well then, there's one of those multiple tables I've been producing on the base of all those numbers, and you see here the top 4 regions where the letters went to. Obviously, it was the Helvetic Confederation, the Swiss Confederation, then also Italy, France, and of course the German Empire. And it's important, I'm so sorry to call it Czechische Republik. I mean with that the Silesia and Bohemia purchase market. Second, the Lettres à la Maison to Lyon and Genoa, enabling and ensuring long-distance trading by weekly correspondence. Every Monday, no matter what, in the comptoir, in one of the 7 impressive buildings constructed in the civil Baroque style in Trogen, the so-called Lettres à la Maison was written by the old generation of merchant Zellweger, responsible for the linen purchase. Overall, I counted 2,500 of those Lettres à la Maison. The loss of a single one meant no less than a fatality, as I've pointed out. An annoyance. Amazingly, such a catastrophe took place only twice during the rather long period examined. The first one flew, that's a quotation, flew from the gallows on the wheel in 1752, what had to be accepted with patience, unaware of cause and intentions. Male robbers caught it, but were caught themselves, not knowing what to do with those abstract exchange letters found in clothes instead of money. The second letter went lost while being carried by a mute young postman from St. Gallen to Trogen one Friday evening in 1754. Merchant Johannes Zellweger, usually composed in his writing, panic-stricken by the non-appearance of the expected letter, talked about, and he is Protestantic, the final judgment. The young postman repented deeply, nearly, quote, fell ill and desperate and begged for grace and forgiveness, end of quote. The deeper meaning of such a behavior that the letter à la maison was simply the thread of life in long-distance trading between Trogen and Lyon or Genoa. First, it played a key role in the exchange of valuable business papers. On every end of the year, the balance sheet as well as the inventory was sent from house to house, allowing the yearly due balance sheet business to be done in Trogen. A single lettre à la maison contained up to 6 of those precious exchange letters with which the customers or clients in Lyon used to pay their purchases in the magazines. The lettre also contained shopping lists, color lists, as well as little examples of thread and pieces of fabrics. Secondly, there is its information density. The repetition of the date of the received letter from Lyon or Genoa allowed both sides to keep control. The polite expression of deeply felt gratitude towards the partner's efforts contributed to the shared business, exposed and traceable in every detail throughout the letter's content, was of great importance. Without the continuous weekly information carefully gathered in Lyon and summed up in a precisely, with number at all and everything, a precise shopping list, the old generation Zellweger, responsible for the purchase of the linen in the commercial diligence surrounding of Strogan, felt utterly at lost. In their case, wholesale in the 18th century was not at all what it is considered nowadays as buying massive quantities to be thrown on the market on low single price. Surprisingly, although they were marchands en gros and really the elite, it rather meant the well-reflected purchase of every single piece of linen based on an available order from clients entertained in Lyon and later Genoa. This kind of trade in goods is the safest trade at all and can therefore be considered itself as a risk management, because what did they do when a customer went bankrupt? They just left everything behind, went on the spot and put their hands on their own goods and took it back to sell it again. Caution, patience and long-term stability. Point 3. First, the careful and detailed enumeration of the exchange letters received from Lyon show up to nowadays how the cash flow was organized. Put into the portfolio in Trogen, the exchange letters were sent to their bankers. For example, Christian Georg Köpf in Augsburg, later Johannes Halder, and then Johannes and Georg Walter von Halder. The list goes on and on as the period and the times goes on. By means of a provision, Köpf in return sent sealed bags of cash to Trogen, enabling them to pay cash their suppliers in their surroundings. In any offer to new clients, the merchants Zellweger always referred proudly to this pay cash as to show off their trustworthiness and reliability. Second, the partners in Trogen wrote carefully about their reflections and observations on the actual economic situation and the manifolded risk in purchasing linen in their rural surrounding. The term conjuncture was yet to be known. They talked about Schläg und läuft, meaning blow and course. They also wrote on the purchases done by their manifolded competitors in Arbon and Rorschach on the lakeside of Lake Constance, on significant alterations and modifications in their workflow, such as the furnishing and implication of parts of the textile finishing. An example was the industrial espionage by the merchants, finisher and dresser Gonzenbach brothers in Hautwil in the early 1750s. And this is a plan of their early manufacture created in the 1660s up to 1670, when in Trogen a linen show was installed on its own as kind of competition, to the one in the city, St. Gallen. Then there is the completely failed attempt with the textile dyers Leodagarius Meyer in Arbon in the 1760s, etc. At least every 10 years they had to adapt their business style or their assortment to the needs of the time flow. Each of these alterations meant to take the risk and led to deep conflicts between the old and the young generation. Third, the little town Beaucaire, at that period geographically ideally located on the mouth of the River Rhone and the France Mediterranean coast, was mentioned in every fifth letter up to 500 times. Every June annually, a tent city sprang from the ground, offering the short-term structure and backdrop for the trade fair de la Sainte-Madeleine on July the 21st to 25th. The strategic location favored the trade route between France, Italy, and especially Spain, from where the goods went into the huge but economically dangerous Spanish colonial empire. This trade fair of Beaucaire was to be identified as the climax of the periodic cycle of the Zellwegers linen trade during the 18th century. In June, a month before the trade fair took place, there, French clients came to Lyon to do their purchases in linen in the magazines of the Swiss textile merchants who were permanently stationed in Lyon to serve their clients all year long. In this context, all the anxious reflections on the high risk of purchasing too much or too little linen in summertime, the manifold challenges of being too late with the textile finishing in wintertime due to bad or unpredictable weather, or the delay of bleachers, dyers, or the expeditors to be provided with a considerable assortment of goods just in time in June make all sense. The difference in the proportion of never-ending reflections, preparations, hardship and tiresome work on behalf of the merchants Zellweger in Trogen, who organized the transformation of the raw piece of linen into a commercial item by means of bleaching, dyeing, printing, finishing, sorting and shipment in comparison to the easiness of the purchase in Lyon and transport by a single river trip on the River Rhone down to Beaucaire on behalf of the French merchants could not be greater. The answer why such an organization would work out profitably is obviously to be found in the distribution of risk. The merchants Zellweger themselves never opened a branch in any Atlantic port city, considering it as too dangerous. In 1747, Johannes Zellweger in Trogen gave a moral sermon to his 25-year-old son Jakob Zellweger, who was the just newly appointed director of the newly opened branch in Lyon. He wasn't the oldest son. The oldest son died at the age of 20 years in Lyon, cause unknown, but this is just another risk, being abroad and dying, well, of course, we don't have to mention it because it's just too normal. This son had entrusted too much money on a single customer who went then bankrupt. So the father said, quote, "It is an art and trouble to sell. It is even bigger to be done with security and caution, and it is better to trade less and safely instead of trading in uncertainty. God may grant the interested parties patience and preservations of the like." This is the first but valid bankruptcy in which our current ration is involved. We wish to escape the disaster not too badly and never ever get into the like disaster again. Amen. End of quote. The argument, nothing ventured, nothing gained, was objected by the old generation, chi va piano va faro. And this is, I'm afraid, the only sentence I've read in Italy. All the other letters are wrote in French. Repeatedly, they forced themselves to maintain patience, as in July 1751, after the disappointingly modest purchase of the merchant clients from Montpellier. Patience, you noble herb. Fourth point. The branches in Genoa. In 1768, Zellweger and Honorlag was opened in Genoa, closely followed 6 years later by the second branch, Zellweger Müller and Company, renamed only 4 years later, Zellweger Zürcher and Company. Why would they choose Genoa La Superba rather than Venice La Serenissima as place to be? First, Venice has always been the place of merchants from Germany. Second, in Genoa, their competitors, Schlepfer Brother from Speicher, Appenzell Ausserrhoden, were established since 1740s. A second branch opened 1765. Therefore, the Zellwegers opening of a branch was probably some lining up to them. But third, the analysis of the Lettre à la Maison to Genoa shed light on the main goal being the purchase of raw cotton from merchant ships arriving in Genoa seaport from Greek, Cyprus, Egypt and the Levantine. Up to the 1750s, their vendors such as König and Jenisch in raw cotton all came from Venice, but originated surprisingly from Kempten, where their main houses were located. The opening of the own branch put an immediate and ultimate end to the correspondence related to those merchants in cotton from Kempten in Venice. Service offers from Zellwegers in raw cotton went from now on to many new clients in eastern Switzerland. Thus, even this cotton import based on carefully gathered orders obtained beforehand in the hometown regions. So, also in the purchase of raw cotton, the applied principle in 70s, 78, 9 was to go slowly and patiently. After the dissolution of the alliance between France and the Swiss Confederation after centuries in 1783, the French Revolution turning Lyon into a dangerous hotspot, the two branches in Lyon were forever closed down after over 100 years of presence. The capital invested in France went to the two branches in Genoa and doubled its financial potency. And now, to the 18th century, the 5 companies Zellweger and their short ending. The changes in the structure observed in the business correspondence of the merchants Zellweger after the turn of the century were indeed huge. First, from 1792 onwards, business in France was done by business travelers only. The trade fair of Beaucaire was no more mentioned, declining to a mere fair similar to the trade fair Bozen, as shown by Bonolfi, and Bozen had indeed become in between their main sales market. The textile printer Johann Heinrich Meyer from Arbon observed on them. Business travelers of the house crisscrossed half Europe in every direction. Huge businesses were made, but never was it possible to gain the overview considered the so limited time left. Merchants' fate escapes anybody from the subject who dares to risk high stakes, is aware of great losses next to unsure profits. End of quote. And indeed, by means of the analysis of the copy letter books, I traced down not less than 10 commercial employees as business travelers on their extended routes crisscrossing Europe from 1800 to 1814. Second, from the long-term stable relationships with suppliers, clients, bankers, and freight forwarders established in the 18th century, almost none survived the revolutionary years, Napoleon's wars, and his continental barrier. Third, due to demographic reasons, after their father's death in 1802 and 08, the 5 cousins Zellweger in Trogen, equally trained as professional textile merchants in the 1770s to the 1780s, that means 3 years of apprenticeship and 6 years being a trade servant, founded 5 trading companies, each of them, based on the more or less 1 million gulden heritage each of one got. The disproportion of the smallness of Trogen to this amount of trading companies was obvious. After over 140 years of continuous success in textile trade, the end was short and sharp in the 1810s. 3 of the 5 at the same time existing companies went bankrupt. The owner of the 4th one left Trogen in 1820 due to legal proceeding because of supposedly committed incest. His descendants committed themselves to the cotton trade until the 1950s. The 5th company, based on one of the first 4 mechanical cotton spinning in Switzerland, merely existed on after a devastating conflagration in 1814. Its owner, he was the former director of the branch in Genoa, responsible for the purchase of raw cotton in Genoa's Arbor, became now himself client of his former customer, Trümpler & Gysi, in Marseille. And this Trümpler & Gysi came from Zurich and produced textile up until the 1990s in Switzerland. Who would have known that Marseille would become the rising star of the French Empire's door to the Mediterranean rather than the French-occupied Republic of Genoa in 1797, that, in a way, simply vanished into thin air in 1814. Revolution, war, economic blockade, the drastic change from periodic trade to free trade, and drastic climatic changes in 1817, caused by the volcano Tambora in Indonesia in 1815, and, last but not least, demographic increase, are incidences out of human control, developing their own dynamics. The time of the marchand en gros needed as hinge between suppliers and clients was totally over and over. The top job profile of the new age after the turn of the century was the manufacturer who knew himself how to trade his goods. The once so busy village place Trogen desolated in just a few years, and grass grew over the place and figuratively over the story of the textile trade that shaped it so boldly throughout the 18th century. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Maya, for this instructive contribution. And now, last but not least, we came to the paper of Magnus Ressel from the University of Bremen. Magnus will speak about vertical integration as a mode of risk minimalization, Specht and Gonsebat in lions in the early 18th century. Magnus, it's your floor.
Many, many thanks for the invitation. It's the second time I'm here, and it is as great as it was in 2013. So wonderful place, and many, many thanks for the invitation. I hope to come again. In his Sociology of Risk, Niklas Luhmann makes a fundamental distinction between the concept of danger and that of risk. Risk refers to situations in which negative consequences are the result of a conscious decision. This refers to actions or decisions taken by a particular actor, and the possible negative consequences of these actions are attributable to the decision makers themselves. Danger, by contrast, refers to negative events that are outside the control or sphere of influence of the actor concerned. These are external threats that are not caused by the actions or decisions of the individual. His classic example is, if I board a plane, I take a risk. If an earthquake shakes this building, that was a danger. But then again, he also advises caution. Maybe we went to a zone where there's a lot of earthquakes, so maybe that can be constructed as a risk. And he says, be aware of the fact that risk is something very much constructed. And if we make judgments on risk-taking or risk averseness, it's always us, let's say, looking ex post on something and trying to, let's say, interpret an event that may be distorted already in our interpretation. And this is exactly what I want to apply here. In the following, I will look at a company that deliberately took great risks and was very successful with them until an unforeseeable danger shook it to its core. Specht et Gonsenbat of Lyon was a Swiss-German company that established strong connections between southern Germany, Switzerland, and the Levantine markets, as well as towards the colonial French Atlantic. Johann Heinrich Gonsenbach was a merchant from St. Gall. Yeah, this place is important. In 1717, he joined forces with Lot Specht, a German merchant from Ravensburg, to found the company Maison Specht et Gonsebat. The firm went insolvent, and I emphasize not bankrupt, as this would suppose fraudulent behavior in French legislation, and it was formally declared by the French legislators themselves that is just insolvency. Not only due to the well-documented law crisis of the 1720s, but also because of stringent trade restrictions following the outbreak of the plague in Marseille. This insolvency led to the seizure of a substantial portion of the company records, roughly 2,300 incoming letters and some adjacent material, which provides detailed insights into the company's global operations around 17 2020. Now, as you can see, there has been already one work published on that company in 1966 by Jacqueline Fayolet. It's a very good one. I like it very much. I wasn't allowed to photograph it. There's only one copy, so this was a bit taken in secret. But I was able to read it entirely, of course, and it is quite impressive. However, she made some, let's say, difficult claims. She looked at the entire period, and she didn't, let's say, make a chronology. So she said, well, look at what happened in 1710, look at what happened in 1740, look at what happened in 1721, and then again 1714. So she mixed it all up, and thus missed what is, in my opinion, the essential aspect of it. And even, let's say, not worse, but coming also together to that is that she and some other persons who wrote on the company made the claim that this company failed due to taking too much risk. And this I want to counter very strongly. What stands out in their business archive is, in my opinion, the high level of vertical integration practiced by Specht and Gonzenbach. They combined both upstream and downstream production and trading processes encompassing linen production in southern Germany or northeastern Switzerland, the stages of bleaching, dyeing, and finishing in the region around Lake Constance, and ultimately the sale of the finished cloth in Switzerland, Italy, or France. A robust network of producers and merchants spanning from Swabia across Lake Constance and into Switzerland and the Republic of Geneva to France played a crucial role in cost reduction. Conversely, the company also sold substantial quantities of French silk products in Switzerland and southern Germany. Their core business activities between France, Switzerland, and Germany were complemented by a diverse range of other ventures, facilitated by an extensive network of business partners throughout Europe. A substantial branch of Gonzenbach and Specht's global trade involved a strong connection with the Levant, surprisingly reliant on German traders in Italy, especially in Venice. A remarkable sketch of the company was given by Pierre Léon, Jacqueline Fayolet, and Maurice Garden in 1969, and they wrote, I just quote the last paragraph, and only that in a shortened version, they write, "A firm like Specht and Gonzenbach operates on a truly global scale, with Lyon as one of its central hubs. Within a vast system that stretches across Europe from the West Indies to the East Indies, certain trade routes are particularly privileged. Routes orchestrated by Lyon from afar, coastal routes linking Hamburg to Alicante, Genoa to Spain's eastern coast, trade routes to the Levant, northern routes to Altona, Russia and Scandinavia via Bordeaux and Rouen, trade routes to the Caribbean, to Canada, to Veracruz and Lima, Persia, China and India. It is always Lyon that, even when the goods never touch the banks of the Rhône or the Saône, gives the instructions and secures the financing, relying on its branches in Rouen, Bordeaux and Marseille. With Specht and Gonzenbach, Swiss-Lyonnais trade reaches a truly universal dimension." Okay, to better understand the dynamics of this process, the presentation is divided into several sections. I guess I'll manage. So first, the introduction, we're already in the middle of that. Then I'll present briefly Gonzenbach and Lord Specht, the two actors. Then I'll look at the two main epochs of the firm. The first one when only Gonzenbach managed it, then after the partnership in 1714, and then I'll come to the insolvency and I will conclude. So first introduction. So, according to Pierre Léon, Jacqueline Fayolet, and Maurice Garden, the Swiss in Lyon were too daring. They allegedly risked too much with too little capital at their disposal. The three authors explicitly write on Specht and Gonzenbach. In fact, although the strength of the Swiss group was real, it quickly encountered significant obstacles. The most important of these obstacles appear to have been of structural nature. The Swiss firms whose assets we are able to quantify were based on relatively weak financial foundations. If we compare the fortunes and capital of these firms with those available to large, truly local houses, other ones, the difference is striking. Thus, the company Specht and Gonzenbach initially benefited from a capital of 20,000 livres. Lord Specht's balance sheet in 1724 shows assets totaling 65,000 livres. The inventory of Gaspard Gonzenbach in 1715 reports total assets of only 14,000 livres. So in the following, I will cast some strong doubts on this hypothesis, which seems to me to stem from a very superficial analysis of the sources. So I come back to the work of Fayolet. Here you see, that's my second, not very much legally taken photo. Here you see what she was able to unearth. We see the impressive range of the activities of the company in the table above. So you see Smyrna, Seide, Cairo. Seide is Sidon in present-day Lebanon. And you see the goods that are transported. You see the value of the goods. We see thus the impressive range of the activities. However, she admits at one point in her work that she was not able to read the German letters of the company. You have the citation below. She says, unfortunately, the letter in which the shipment is mentioned is written in old German script and is very difficult to decipher, making it impossible to trace the whereabouts of the shipments. Thus, of the 2,300 surviving letters, she left out at least 700. Mostly from Switzerland and Germany, but also from Paris, Livorno, and Venice, where substantial German merchant communities resided, and they always wrote in German. This results, in my opinion, in a strongly lopsided analysis. Here you see the main places from which the company received its letters between 1710 and 1721. But please note that, of course, incoming letter doesn't mean incoming flow of cash or flow of money or something. This can be a distortion, but basically it matches. So where you get a lot of letters from, mostly it's also the place where you have an important, let's say, business dealing with. Paris, Nuremberg, Geneva, Nîmes, St. Gall, Montpellier, Venice, and Amsterdam stand out. London and Smyrna are also places where the company had partners, furthermore Madrid, Alicante, and Sidon, as well as Leipzig and Hirschberg in Silesia. Already with this rough overview, we see a strong international orientation of the company, which was based on trading operations mostly in an enlarged Western Europe. Thus I come to point 2, to Gonzenbach. So, very briefly, he lived from 1768 in St. Gall to 1740 in Lyon. In Lyon, he resided from 1700 onwards. We have his Inventaire après décès from 1740, and there we see a modestly wealthy person, despite the insolvency of the company in 1723. So we know that he recovered afterwards, which was possible in French legislation. You make an accord with the creditors and debtors, and then you can simply start anew. He came from one of the most important merchant families in St. Gallen. He also embodied other family alliances such as the Zollikofer, Kunz, Locher, and Wegelin families. These are all the top families in St. Gallen's textile industry and long-distance trade. The Gonzenbach family had been present in Lyon since at least 1636. The family broke with St. Gall in the 1650s with a huge scandal, and then they relocated to Hauptwil, 15 kilometers away from St. Gall in the Thurgau, where the St. Gall had no longer any control. This was Untertanenland, so they could basically do what they want without guild control. And there they produced linen in substantial quantities, and they imported and re-exported vast quantities of so-called cheap Schwabenleinwand, Überseer, coming from overseas, but not from overseas the Mediterranean, but only Lake Constance. I here cite Ernest Medolfi. The innovation also lay in the extensive consolidation of all production facilities and trading operations at one location under a unified private management. For Hans Jakob Gonzenbach, the advantages included not only significant cost savings and time efficiency, but especially better monitoring and control of all production stages. This allowed the processes to be coordinated and rationalized, and careful handling of the cloths helped significantly improve quality and prevent damage during production. So here we see a significant step towards the modernization and rationalization of production processes, vertical integration. It can be assumed that from at least this time forward, such an entrepreneurial mindset prevailed among the economically active members of the Gonzenbach family. So in Lyon, I guess he got into contact with the South Germans. There was also the Nation Allemande. It also existed until the end of the 18th century. And there he met Lord Specht, who had been born in 1685 in Ravensburg. The last sign I have from him, I do not know when he died, but he naturalized as a merchant in London 1735. So also he obviously could start anew after the insolvency, and obviously was able to make a fortune in London. Ravensburg now itself was not an important commercial hub in southern Germany, but it was always home to some important merchants and entrepreneurs active in the long-distance trades. Specht came from the mother side from a family that was engaged in far-flung trading networks spanning Vienna, Strasbourg, Esslingen, Danzig, Thorn, and even St. Petersburg. And in Venice, the Ravensburgers had always maintained a small but not unsubstantial presence in the Fondaco dei Tedeschi. And this tradition was continued, of course, until deep into the 18th century. It's a bit speculation, but I think he was an apprentice of the Ravensburger Michael Schirnbrand in Venice, and that Schirnbrand sent him to Lyon to extend his proper business range. So now I come to the prehistory of the firm. Gonzenbach, he was an apprentice in Lyon from Anton Locher, who is a very important financier of the War of the Spanish Succession. So after the war concluded, the French government congratulated him personally and were very thankful because he assured the functioning of the French war machinery in time of stress and necessity. Then at some point he became independent, made his first steps as an independent merchant with textile trade with Saint-Étienne, and he basically had this strong connection with his brother in Leipzig. So at that point he was more or less dependent on his brother in Leipzig, who ran the main show. So he primarily handled silk and dyes, supported by the Leipzig connections, and Schaffhausen was the key hub to do all these northbound shipments. As I said, it was mainly a purchasing post for Leipzig, trading luxury goods and medicinal items. After 1712, he began exporting Swiss and Silesian linen to France, expanding now beyond the local nation Swiss trade pattern. This is something that was not so typical for them. He sourced Swabian linen for Genoa and Marseille via Nikolaus Zollikofer, who was a very important merchant, Swiss merchant in Marseille. And then he connected through global markets through Amsterdam. By 1714, Silesia completely replaced Leipzig as a trade hub, with linen export reaching now Madrid via Hamburg intermediaries. So you see this growth is quite impressive. And here you see his map. So it's the first phase of the company. And you see Switzerland is strong. We have no engagement in the Eastern Mediterranean. In Germany, Leipzig is of importance. Nuremberg is weak. Paris is rather small. Venice is also rather small. So this is, let's say, the Swiss phase of the company. The dominant axis is one from St. Gall via Lyon to Marseille. So it looks a bit classy Swiss. That's what the Swiss nation in Lyon does, but we already all seen that he's already moving beyond that. So I come to the second phase of the company. He severed his business relations with all of his relatives in 1714, shifting away now decisively from the St. Gall trade routes. So this Gonzenbach became kind of a renegade. And now he expanded his business to Spain, Silesia, Hamburg, and throughout France. Now he was trading textiles, metals, and dyes. His success in trading Swabian linen through Upper Swabian business cycles greatly surpassed now the Swiss linen producers by 1714, and in 1717 he finally formalized his partnership with Lotspecht, and that was the moment when he began to massively extend his trade connections to southern Germany via Lutheran merchants. So now you can see that the hitherto reformed merchant network now expands into the Lutheran world of trade connections. And by 1719, his connections extended, then he again extended it to Swiss markets, re-establishing trade relationships with firms in Schaffhausen, Arbon, and Zurich, but not in St. Gallen. That rupture had been definite. So Specht and Gonzenbach experienced business success well into the 1720s, expanding their product range with goods from Spain and the Levant. This is also important. You see, these are the folders that I find in the archives in Lyon of the Paris partners. And as you can see, they are all of the second phase of the company. So he had no business partners in Paris up to that point. And once he had them, it's mostly Germans. It's Ringmacher, Hoffmann, and Firnkranz. These are southern German names. And as you can see, the correspondence with them is always in German. They often write to him just to Monsieur Lotspecht. They often omit Gonzenbach. So for them, the company, for these southern Germans in Paris or in Venice, it was basically only Lotspecht. And this is the model that I could extract. It's always a triangular model. So we have Venice, Augsburg, and Lyon. This is the essential triangle on which all depends. So, and what are they doing? Silk from Lyon to Augsburg, from Augsburg and Swabia, linen back, and silk, raw silk coming from Venice and from Italy, and again also cloth to Venice. So, and metal products also to Venice. So this structure is let's say it's the core of their model. Otherwise, you cannot understand that. That's why, let's say, it wouldn't make sense for me just to study the Lyon aspect of the company. Only with Venice do I really arrive at the full picture of it. And this is one other part of their model. You see, these are so-called Ballen of Stauchen. That's high-quality linen, and this is in the in the warehouses in Lyon. So they did a huge degree of warehousing. You see, the lists are very long, and that's a striking contrast to what we just heard. Zellweger never did warehousing, but this is what they did excessively. A lot of linen, so to be always present on the market. That was one more aspect of their business model, which also is risky, maybe, in a certain sense. So here we have now the second phase of the company. And this illustration reveals a market shift and focus towards the German-speaking world following now the partnership with Specht. Nuremberg now stands out prominently, while Breslau appears for the first time. Leipzig disappears. Gonzenbach's main partners there had been Swiss, so it's no wonder that Leipzig disappears. The overall, meaning mostly Gonzenbach partners in Leipzig. The overall importance of Switzerland has declined significantly, with minor exceptions such as Schaffhausen. This is now important as a shipping hub. Hamburg, on the other hand, emerged more prominently. Venice became extremely important due to the presence of the strong group of Ravensburg merchants with whom Specht had the trade connections of Venice. And the contacts with Spain and England disappeared. However, you see now other locations in the Eastern Mediterranean, Smyrna and Sidon. Okay, I come through the insolvency and the conclusion. Does it work? Okay, so this is well known. John Law's speculative Mississippi Company bubble burst in the early 1720s, triggering a massive financial panic in France. Then the French government decree in May 1720 halved share in paper money values, worsening public trust and market confidence. And in May 1720, a deadly plague arrived in Marseille, spreading rapidly despite quarantine measures, devastating trade and killing thousands. So Marseille's trade stopped entirely by the early 1721, and the shipments were now held in quarantine, and regional partners were warning of chaos. European borders tightened drastically due to the plague, cutting Specht and Gonzenbach off from the vital Holy Roman Empire markets. So they were all of a sudden cut off from their main markets. And the Swiss merchants in Lyon weathered the crisis, but Specht and Gonzenbach's reliance on imperial trade routes now proved disastrous. There's even a comment of Herbert Lüthi. He said, it's impressive that we Swiss weathered the crisis of 1720 in Lyon. So this law crisis didn't affect Swiss. So he said, it's good that we were so conservative. I'd say yes, but could this have been foreseen? Is that really risk-taking if you don't, let's say, expect a major, huge financial crisis mixed with a huge plague crisis and quarantine crisis? So what did they do? They desperately tried to reroute their trade through Altona and Amsterdam that failed to compensate for the loss of overland trade and proved logistically and financially unsustainable. So after 1721, we have no longer any record, but then we have the accord with the creditors and the debtors of 1724, so that's the insolvency. These are just some citations. How much time do I still have? 1 minute. 1 minute, okay. I will not read that. Just the last line. We live in... these are these typical, let's say, correspondences of the time. We live in bad times, and the fallissements that are breaking out, they will make it even worse. The God may help us in His Gnade, in His mercy. May Christ have mercy upon us. And again, dem Commercio droht wohl bald in Europa der Untergang. So I have a lot of these letters because all these quarantine measures, they are completely devastating this entire trade regime. And here you also see that the emperor himself was quite deliberately cutting off Switzerland and France from all of these trade routes. That may have been, let's say, kind of Habsburg-Austrian, also political act against the adversary in Europe. Yeah. So my conclusion is, contrary to the claims of Léon, Garden, and Fayolet, Specht and Gonzenbach's insolvency was not due to misconduct or a weak capital base, but rather external shocks beyond the calculated commercial risks. The trading network reoriented from Switzerland and Leipzig towards German centers like Nuremberg and ports like Venice and Hamburg. We have seen that. And these were rational business decisions which let's say, proved to be very profitable. The Franco-German religious ties, Lutheran and Reformed, connections to the Huguenots in France, in Montpellier especially, and as I said, to Silesia or to Hamburg, linked to powerful overlapping merchant networks across Europe and the Mediterranean. and their dependence on the international trade made them vulnerable to the crisis like the 1720 Marseille plague quarantines. It was not so much the law crisis, it really was the quarantine of the 1720s and 1721. Conservative Swiss firms focusing only on France survived the crisis, while Specht and Gonzenbach's innovative model proved riskier. Okay, maybe I shouldn't have used the word because I just wanted to prove the opposite. But it was a risk worth taking. It was a calculated, rational risk. The calculated risk-taking and global vision positioned them as early pioneers of early European globalization. So applying Luhmann's theory, that's what I finally say, the firm exemplified rational risk-taking, distinguishing between calculable risk and unforeseeable dangers. So I am countering the prevalent interpretation of the company and say we shouldn't make it so easy for us to simply judge ex post. They were just too risk-taking. That is a distortion of historical reality. Many thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Magnus, for this dense contribution. And now we have the same procedure as every day. Please fill in the formula for the discussion. We make a short coffee break and we will start again at 16:35. 20 minutes, I think it's enough, and when we will have enough time for discussion. inauguration of the exhibition A Future to Build Up in the framework of the events dedicated to Prato of the 50th, stemming from the exhibition The Historian and the Merchant, Federico Melis and Francesco Rattini. You all are invited to attend. And now we will come to our discussion, and we will bring the questions together, and then each participant will have the possibility to answer and to sum up the questions. The first are the questions for Sari, and we will begin with Giuseppe. Prego.
Grazie, volevo ringraziare gli autori di questo contributo, di questa relazione, perché è naturalmente molto importante, molto interessante sfruttare fino in fondo, no, il tesoro rappresentato da questa documentazione di Joan del Torralba, anche con questi metodi analitici particolarmente nuovi. Io ho soltanto un paio di curiosità e forse un'osservazione che potrebbe essere utile. È stato fatto anche un riferimento, mi è parso, tra la pratica delle assicurazioni, così come risulta manifestata nei documenti e nelle fonti che sono state usate, che sono essenzialmente, se ho capito bene, i manuals, cioè i libri, e le pratiche notarili. Però una domanda che ho, una curiosità che ho, in che cosa differisce secondo lei, secondo voi, e se differisce, l'informazione che è presente in una fonte contabile come quella di Joan de Torralba e le informazioni che si trovano normalmente negli atti notarili presenti nei notai di mercanti che stipulano anche contratti di sicurezza. Mi pare di ricordare che ci sono anche libri specializzati per le assicurazioni nella documentazione dell'archivio notarile di Barcellona. E allora, qual è la relazione tra queste due fonti diverse di informazioni? Poi, a proposito della valutazione del rischio, mi sono chiesto se in fondo, e questa è una domanda forse generale, nella valutazione del rischio, quindi nella decisione di pagare un premio più alto o più basso, non possa essere importante anche la riflessione, la valutazione del mercante sulla nave, sul convoglio eventuale in cui questa nave è inserita, di che tipo di naviglio si tratta. Penso che sarebbe un'informazione da avere nel vostro spoglio e nel vostro dataset, forse c'è. Per esempio si tratta di nau catalane, ci sono casi di assicurazioni su carichi che viaggiano su galere di linea veneziane. Io ricordo, sono ricordi di quando avevo la sua età, che avevo letto il vecchio articolo di Mario Del Treppo sulle assicurazioni e mi pare di ricordare che c'era un cenno al fatto che nel caso di viaggi e merci che erano trasportate dai convogli di linea veneziani, magari l'assicurazione non si faceva affatto perché il rischio era abbastanza basso. L'ultima è un'osservazione un po' che mi ha colpito, una curiosità. Ho notato questa coincidenza cronologica tra l'esaurirsi, il chiudersi dell'ultima azienda di Joan de Torralba, delle prime 5, e poi l'inizio, l'avvio di un'attività individuale, in cui tra l'altro Torralba risulta soprattutto assicuratore, o forse esclusivamente assicuratore. Mi pare di aver capito, forse non sono stato sufficientemente attento. E questa è una coincidenza che mi colpisce perché nel dicembre del 1447, mi pare di ricordare, quindi non so fino a che punto Torralba possa avere valutato che stava capitando, stava succedendo qualcosa, Alfonso d'Aragona espelle tutti i mercanti fiorentini dalla Corona d'Aragona. E c'è questa strana coincidenza che mi colpisce anche perché ricordo che c'è lo scriba di un notaio molto frequentato allora a Barcellona, Pere Bastat, che prima era scriba di Onorat Saconamina, che inaugura proprio nel 1448 una sua serie di registri notarili, in cui tra l'altro mi pare di ricordare ci fossero molte assicurazione, in cui la clientela, io avevo fatto allora una ricerca molto breve sulla diaspora dei pisani nel Mediterraneo aragonese e anche a Barcellona, poi la clientela diventava prevalentemente pisana. Questo è una coincidenza forse, ma comunque è qualcosa che si pone nell'ottica di un problema più generale che credo che voi abbiate presente, che è proprio la riflessione che aveva fatto sempre Mario Del Treppo a proposito delle relazioni tra i metodi, le pratiche mercantili, la sapienza mercantile dei mercanti fiorentini e toscani e le capacità tecniche dei mercanti catalani, rovesciando un luogo comune che va assolutamente rovesciato, quella di un'assoluta inferiorità, eccetera, e andando invece verso forme di contaminazione e trasmissione della conoscenza e costruzione di nuove tecniche e diffusione di nuove tecniche, che penso che sia la via utile. Ecco, allora, forse anche questa particolare opportunità di avere una congiuntura nella quale i fiorentini sono costretti a fare un passo indietro può avere, come dire, accelerato trasformazioni, forse avere dato a Joan del Torralba delle occasioni per migliorare per cambiare anche, diciamo così, il suo profilo di mercante e di attività finanziaria, commerciale, eccetera, e via dicendo. Grazie.
Thank you very much. And the second question is from Marianne, please.
Thank you for a very stimulating paper. My question is boring, though. I'm intrigued by your reference to that you're using digital prosopographies and prosopographical tools, and so I was curious what platform you're using and where that shows up. Are you analyzing the merchants? Because prosopography is collective biography, you're looking at people. And does that show up in your paper, or is that more in another part of the project? So just a little bit more about those digital tools, especially digital prosopography.
Thank you very much. And now it's Julie Claustre. S'il vous plaît.
Je vais poser ma question en français, ça ira? Doucement. Je crois qu'elle a déjà été un peu posée, donc c'est une reformulation. Ma question porte sur les marchandises qui sont transportées sur ces bateaux qui sont assurés. Pourquoi vous n'avez pas donné plus d'éléments, d'informations sur ces marchandises? Est-ce que c'est un seul type de marchandise? Peut-être la laine, je crois avoir entendu à un moment, mais je ne suis pas sûre. Ou est-ce qu'il y en a d'autres? Est-ce que ça change? Est-ce que les marchandises changent? Et est-ce que pourquoi l'exclure de votre analyse, de votre démonstration, qui est parfaitement convaincante par ailleurs? Merci.
Merci bien. And the fourth and last question for Sari is from Isabella Cecchini. To the microphone, please.
Very sorry about that. Una questione metodologica sul modello di regressione. Perché non è stata inclusa la variabile temporale? Perché non è un path dependency model? Il tempo è una variabile importante, anche se la serie di dati non ha, it is not so linear in time. However, the cost of insurance depends on the past information. So why did not consider a path dependence model, as in the very simple model of stock markets, for instance? And secondly, as the professor has said, probably the kind of ship matters. If you put a cargo on a Venetian vessels in a convoy of galleys, you could pay a lower cost if you are a Venetian. you pay a higher cost of insurance if you are not a Venetian. However, you have already paid protection costs coming from the convoy. So I would say that analyzing with an econometric model the correlation between insurance and premium, it would be nice to see if there is, if you could use una variabile to detect the nationality of the vessel, and so I think you could add more information in your model. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now it's on you, Sally. Please.
Thank you very much for all the questions. Some of them are very, very deep questions, and actually, and in one case, I love. Can I answer the can I choose the order?
As you like.
Okay. So, I've lost the order. That's the point. Okay, about the programs, about the prosperographical analysis and the programs that I use, I guess actually my answer will be quite boring. I use just Python, and for depicting the network analysis, I use Gephi. So in this case, I guess my answer is very boring. That's the problem. So collecting the information, unfortunately, about the prosperographical analysis, making that extremely in depth, sometimes it's quite impossible because we don't have a lot of information about all the merchants. So what we basically do how is our data set? So I collect all the data and I put that in the post SQL language. So I collected there in very rough way, and then I put that in Gephi to visualize in the network. Or if I use some kind of econometric analysis or whatever, I just usually use Python or MATLAB. So I guess my answer is boring. And have I answered the question? Because okay. Because I'm not sure if I really answered the question correctly. Because the prosperographical analysis directly, I don't do that. I don't do that. So maybe that's why I'm a bit lost in the answer. Okay, so I will start with regression, with the methodological. The second one, the methodological question. In this case, I do agree. The point is that in general, the OLC, it's ambiguous. I do agree. I didn't use the time variable. There's okay. I'm structuring the answer in my head. That's why I'm a bit making the definition. If I say why I use OLC, the OLC assumption, making the contradiction as we usually do in mathematics. So the data set is fragmentary because, as I told, I not every time have the amount and the premium at the same case. So that's number one. Then we have some measurement errors. So that was the point number two. And then the sample size, it's quite actually small. We're speaking only about 200 cases on 200 instances. So for statistics, it's quite small. So that's why I opted for. And actually, the questions that I made for regression, I guess I had the answer. But I extremely agree with that I am violating one of the assumptions, one of the rule of the non-linear structure, because actually the OLC model requires that. That's what makes, because when we're speaking about the historical economic relationships, they may not, and they are not linear in many cases. So that's the big problem when we have this advantage. But the problem is, and for sure you know that, to choose a correct climatic model sometimes is quite impossible. So we have to find something that we will sacrifice in the name of obtaining the result. So about the temporal, the variable about the time, we designed two models. And as the paper is provisional, I guess we will opt for the temporal one. I presented like only the conclusion, but I didn't say that, and that's my error. Actually, it's my fault and my mistake. I didn't announce that the model includes the variable of time, because there's 2 manuals and we span on the time. We have like the timeline, and I didn't mention that, and that's my error. So well, thank you very much for highlighting that. So in the paper, in the final one, we obviously will opt with the time one. The result doesn't change. So it stays the same, very positive when we speak about, very negative when we speak about the Venice, and very positive about the Ragus. But yes, you're absolutely right. The number, and as a good economist, we have to fix on the number, changed slightly. And in this way, the other things that I'm just like on the, I just opened the precisely model that we have. When we speak about the historical analysis in economic history, that in history is this non-ergogenic system. So that was another point, was I thought like the OLC would be the best problem. But another things that we do violate when we're speaking about the data set that we have is the autocorrelation. So the historical data frequently exhibit that time series dependency, but making the second GARC analysis, so like reducing all this autocorrelation that is like it's out of the system, and we do expose that, and the final papers would be exposed in the methodological description that I made 2 running times, because from the first time, and you're absolutely right, it doesn't work from the first running, so you need to run it twice. Did I answer all the questions? Okay, you're welcome. About the vessels. That would be like the answer within the 2 questions about the vessels. Majorly, we're speaking about the Catalan vessels, because Joan de Torralba we don't have any information for today. Everything that we analyzed that he used to make to insure the merchandise on non-Catalan vessel, or non-Catalan ships. So all the ships that, when we speak about the Torralba, all the commercial part, all the trade, is on the Catalan ships. So it could be any trade line, but at the end of the day, we're speaking about, every time we speak about the, let's say, internal vessels. So if they go, if we have the departure point from Mallorca, that's the, let's say, Catalan vessel, if we have the departure from Barcelona. So in this case, no, the Venetian part with the vessel, it's not introduced in the model, and it's not studied per se, just because he didn't use them. He didn't insure the merchandise on non-Catalan vessel. Like by all the data, if I'm not mistaken, we don't have this data, so he didn't use. Connected with that, about the conocimiento the Toscan knowledge and the Catalan technique, and the conjunction, all this transformation, if it's coincidence and non-coincidence, that it happens in the 1447 when he becomes, he became more as an insurer, but he still insured his merchandise because he still was trading. So that was a mix between 2 things. So as we had the situation previously when he was more as an insured party, not as an insurer. From the 47, he's more as an insurer, not an insured, but it doesn't mean that the insured part disappeared. It doesn't, actually. So it still present like, to be exact, 41% of the cases. So if there's a coincidence with the prohibition or with restriction of the Florentine merchants, yes, obviously it is. There's no non-casual, there's no non-linearity in this case, but at the same time, no. The ability of him on the X moment, like in some point, to change the strategy and being more an insurance is in general tendency in the Crown of Aragon. It was quite I can't say accepted tendency, but I can say the tendency that is seen in Mallorca and Barcelona above all. So if there's any connection, any direct connection, if we can assume that due to the Florentine techniques or the diffusion of the Florentine techniques between the merchants from the Crown of Aragon, the answer is actually quite no. The previous opinion that I had, yes, as the same as that everyone said that the practice of the double entry is only diffused in northern Italy, when actually it's not. And actually at the end of the 14th century we have merchants that they use the double entry in Barcelona because we have evidence. So I'm not saying that, I'm trying to avoid saying the point that there's absolutely no connection. Obviously, yes, because the diffusion of information, the presence of the Catalan merchant in Pisa, precisely the last archival work that we made in the Archivio di Stato di Firenze, precisely with the scarcity fund of the notarial, of his notarial resources, the high presence and high density of the Catalan merchants in Pisa, and their connections with the Florentine merchants. So obviously the interconnection interconnect this in this way of the practice, it occurs. But I guess I'm not enough brave to say that the change of this merchant only, because this only case that where we have all the continuity of all the primary sources saved, it's directly connected because of the change in the Tuscan practice or the knowledge that the Tuscan merchant had. Because it's the same, it goes back to the question, we don't have an answer where for the first time and where the interest originated. So stating it's in a very simplistic way, Genoa or Florencia, that would be quite interesting because we do have the examples of the first insurance contract in Mallorca. They date almost at the same time as the Genoa. So in this case, what would we say? That was the trespass of the practice. They came and they showed to the Majorcan merchants how to do the contract of the insurance, or that was something that autochthonally, like locally, was formed. So in this way, I will not say no, but I will not say yes about the 47, about the year 1447. It's quite complicated in this case. And when we speak about the clientela, when we speak about in general the partner of Torralba, obviously he was introduced, heavily introduced in all the network of the Florentine merchants. But at the end of the day, all his commercial connections with Italy, almost always, in his case, if the Professor Dolores Lopez wants to correct me, are connected with some representation of the Catalan or Aragonese merchants on Italian land. So they're not always direct with Italian merchants when we're speaking about the external commercial relationships of Joan de Torralba. Pardon? Can I say that in Spanish in a moment? Oh, no.
No.
No, lo que acabo de comentar es que precisamente no estaba integrado en la red mercantil de Italia, pero no siempre comerciaba directamente con ellos, tenía intermediarios. Exactly, that's one thing that I wanted just to reassure myself. So I said that correctly. I said that correctly. So that was the point. So when we're speaking about he was introduced in the network with Italian merchants, precisely all of them when they were present in Barcelona. So he was inside, and we see that from the archive from Italy. And the latest case, this is the Scarsi, the Galliano Scarsi fund. But the point is he didn't do the business directly with Italians when he sent the merchandise, for example, the wool or whatever it is, to Italy. He was not directly with Italian. He always used intermediaries, the Catalan merchant that were presented there. So that's another point that I can't speak about the transmission. So in my personal opinion, my personal opinion, maybe that's not would be the most popular opinion, about the apprenticeship or diffusion of the practice, and label the diffusion of the practice directly from one territory to another territory, I would say maybe on the microeconomic level it's not always the most correct way. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it makes centricity on only one region and like avoid the complexities of other regions in this case. And I'm not sure if I answered all the questions.
I think. Yes.
No, I didn't answer the first question. I'm so sorry. About the practice of notarial practice, like when we have the resource from notarial records and when we have the resource from the accounting resource, the difference between this type when we speak about the insurance, actually the information is almost the same. When we speak about the ledger, the information is very dry, so we have only the instance that we have the insurance contract, where the vessel goes, who is the patrón della nave, the captain. Thank you very much. Who is the captain of the ship, but we don't have the specific information. But then the manuals or in journal, as they describe more the entry, they put more information. But the notarial record usually they have the copy of the contract, so we have the whole information. We have all other underwriters, we have the amount that they contribute. So the notarial record of insurance information is richer. It's actually it's really richer comparing to the accounting, the purely resource that we take from the accounting book. The merchandise, this absolutely different. Majorly the wool, and also it could be the width. So it depends. But there is a problem, and that would be, I guess, a bit epistemological problem. When we take the accounting books, should I answer in English, or it's okay? So the problem is with accounting books, being the journals or being the ledgers, it doesn't matter. They do not specify the merchandise. Within the book, we don't have the specification of what merchandise exactly we do trade in this moment. So my answer could be deduction, and it depends on the year. So it depends on the period. So in one period, when we see the extensive trade in the wool, so we can deduct that we're speaking about the wool. And actually, in this case, it's purely speculation. We see the destination, so when we speak about the Ragusa, in almost all the cases it was the wool. So he didn't trade wheat, for example, to Ragusa. It was not the popular destination for them. So the answer is, he doesn't state that in accounting book. We don't have that information. So we can take that only from the contract, if we have the contract, and from the 5 contracts that we have, because it's just like lately, we're finishing writing the paper, they don't state the merchandise. They just don't say it. So you have to deduce from the whole information that you have previously from the merchant, the whole his previous years, and making more qualitative analysis to make a deduction like this line with this merchant, that from this square of Ragusa, almost every time, almost in 100% of the cases, the trade is with the wool. That's all. So explicitly, we will not find that written in the book. I hope I have answered all the questions.
I think so. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And now we are coming to the question on Maya's paper. There is only one from Katja, please.
Thank you, Maya. I have 3 questions, and they're exactly the same for Maya and for Magnus, so I don't need to come back. So I think the first question relates to the sources. I think you're looking at mostly correspondence, if I understood properly. So I would like to understand a little bit the qualification of these letters instead of the quantity of these letters. And the qualification of the letters is important so that we actually understand the centrality of what is happening. So not only the geographical centrality, like you show in your map, but also the intensity and the connectivity of the people you're looking into. Borrowing money from someone in a time period of 30 years is different than you're sending them every 6 months a bale of cloth. These are very different social relationships. So I guess my question is, when you qualify the letters that you're looking into, does your feeling about the network, the business, and actually the risks that these people are taking whether this changes from if you look at the quantity of letters that are going up and down for specific regions. I would expect so. So that's one point. The second point has to do with, so as historians, when we look at the correspondence, is great because you have a world before you, but this is not necessarily the world. So we have we can have an helicopter view of what we're looking into, while the guy that is writing and receiving these letters may just have a very different view of the world. So again, the question here is, if you are sitting on the chairs of your main actors and you are receiving and sending these letters, what are the risks that you're perceiving? And what are the risks that you're actually pursuing in terms of curbing? And what actually does this understanding of risk says about the world these men are working in? It seems that they're connected everywhere, but I mean, they come from a very, I wouldn't say closed society, but this is not a port, right? This is not. So there are constraints in the visions of the world that they have. And perhaps there's no constraints, but then I think I would like to understand why the constraints aren't there and whether this is influencing their measurement of risk. And my last question, again, has to do with the space, the geographical space, but also the mental space that these men belong to. And I don't understand why they go down, basically, right? So I don't understand why, but perhaps that is my mistake that I didn't understand in your presentation. I don't know, how do these firms come to an end? So what brings them down? It seems that they do this for a long time, it goes fine. They understand their world, they shift, they move, they anticipate even the emperor, right, Magnus? So they can move a little bit, they have flexibility, somehow they understand what they're doing, and I absolutely trust that they're really good at what they're doing, but that somehow at some point things just slowly fall apart. So what changes that at one point they're on the top of their game, and then they're not? So is it an internal problem? Is it adaptation problem? Is that the pressures from the outside are getting too high and they're belonging to a world that is not catching up? I mean, it can be all kinds of things, but this means that perhaps would be my hypothesis, is that at some point they lose contact, they lose the sense of reality of the risks that they're facing. Or perhaps not, perhaps it's just contingency, right? Stuff happens to people. A little bit your thoughts on these three things, because I think they're very interesting sources because they relate pretty much to the same area also of thought, the world of thought. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katja. Please.
Thank you so much for your question. Well, the last owner of Zellweger and Company, he was a father of 17 children, and he was the only owner of this big and huge Zellweger and Company in 1814 up to 1817. And at the same time, he was the chosen Landermann of Appenzell-Ausserrhoden. That means he was at the highest position politically seen. And as we all know, from 18 to 1815, I wouldn't have been Landermann at that time because it was just a crazy time. And his brother did all the labor for him up to 1807. And he traveled everywhere, even to Silesia, to check if there would have been still some trade to do in linen with Silesia and Bohemians linen. But he came back and he underwent a breakdown, a nervous, because he realized there is no more business to do in the old way, and he really collapsed. And after this collapse, because this travel in 1806 to 1807 happened to be when Napoleon was doing his Völkerschlacht by Leipzig. Well, crazy that he even went there, but he did. well, that's a risk, and he took this risk on him, but and crossed the armies, being there, just like, oh, hello, I'm also here, and then going back over Silesia and Bohemia, hometown again. But he starved on this travel, so he really went to his an den Rand kommen. On the margins, he went to his own margins, yes, even went over. And he left the company to his brother. And suddenly this brother, who was doing politics in a very high standard, was in a way left alone. And what I suppose is he just lost, what you said, contact with reality, and didn't do that control that his former our great-grandfathers did. He lost contact and he lost control, and he was kind of really generously doing business, hiring people, crisscrossing Europe instead of keeping control. He asked the Landsgemeinde to leave him, to let him go, but the Landsgemeinde didn't let him go, so he had to stay in his political amt as Landermann, and that's how he got into this bankruptcy. But, in fact, if you look at the bankrupt in detail, there has been the meeting of the creditors, and there they got a contract up to be being paid up to 70%. And I was wondering, is to be paid by 70% high or is it low? So I called actual debt collect an official debt collecting office in Appenzell-Ausroden, and the man doing this business professionally told me, from a point of nowadays, you would never talk of a bankrupt by being paid by 70%. But what happened then is, after 4 years, in 1821, the procedure has been renewed. The creditor asked to be paid for 92%, because what had happened in between these 4 years is that this owner, Jakob Zellweger, he died. But now the trust of, or the honor of being a politician who was quite reputative at that moment, and now he is away, you can ask his brother to pay the debt of the death owner of the company. So that's quite a strange thing that happened, but there was no shared power. So this Landermann had all of the power in himself, in his personage alone, and this was probably the reason that he could quiet down the creditors to 70%, and then they got their 92% in the end. So to look at how much percent the creditors get would tell us, is it an insolvency or is it a bankruptcy? That's what I think is an interesting question to decide if we have an insolvency or a bankruptcy, of course.
Thank you very much, Maya. And there are two further questions to Magnus Ressel. The first from Tanya, please. No.
Thanks very much. Okay, I hope it's not too late to talk about Luhmann. Because if you talk about Luhmann, we must talk about concepts. And of course, it's always a bit triggering for me, because Luhmann, he was like, he claimed to master everything. So did he actually know a lot about the medieval period? I don't think so, but okay. Okay, my question. You said that the risk-taking was a calculated risk-taking by your Gonzenbach family, and this you use as an argument against that risk was something that came from outside. I would like, first part of my question is, I would like to know where do you differentiate, or maybe we all should think about differentiation between risk, contingency, and danger. Because danger would be, in Luhmann's definition, something that would come from outside, whereas risk is something that is being applied, attributed, perceived by actors. So sociological perspective, of course. So where is the difference between that for you? I know it's, sorry for this very, it's not the, and the second part, talking about Luhmann, talking about risk, talking about Luhmann means also talking about another big concept he dealt with, and this is trust. So we haven't talked about trust a lot. I know many economic historians don't like to talk about trust, but I would like to ask you, how would you apply the concept of trust? It is not the flip side of what he defines as risk. It's something else that comes into play. It's the mechanism to reduce complexity. And I would like to know, how can we fit in this trust? Or we just say, okay, just let's ignore Luhmann forever. But
thank you very much. And now, Joris, please.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed these papers. And I think my question is very similar to both what Katja has asked and what Tanya has just asked before. But I will still ask it and see if maybe there is difference. And it goes from the same thing, where the conceptual framework in the beginning, where you say danger is sort of outside natural variance and risk is personal responsibility, more or less. And then towards the end you say, well, this he went bankrupt because of the spread of disease and geopolitical reasons, so that's danger and not really risk. Am I understanding it correctly? Yet at the same time you quoted a contemporary person who did not consider this, another merchant who did not consider this a natural variance, but a risk of this merchant, or like he himself had managed risk better than the other merchant. At least that's what I understood from your talk. So the main question is, why do you think differently than a contemporary person? And sort of as a follow-up question, and that ties in more to what Katja has asked, and I think that might also can be asked for the second speaker. What is a normal risk pursuit? Like, what is a normal amount of risk to pursue, and when are you sort of endangering? And then we come into the trust, then your trustworthiness in the eyes of your partners. That's my question.
Thank you very much. Now it's your floor. Magnus.
I will answer the three questions of Katja as one, because it is a methodological one, so I will not cite the example of my company. I will give a methodological answer. So basically I'm dissatisfied with the traditional interpretations of failure, and you had them all the centuries. The Fugger went bankrupt because they became too conservative, the Ravensburg Handelsgesellschaft became bankrupt because they whatever did, and you have that up to these present days. So we have a problem of interpreting business history. That is I mean, it's getting better. I can certainly admit that, but it still is a very prevalent way of, let's say, interpreting some companies' histories. And I very much like these two new developments, the new business history. You know, De Jong and Michael Higgins and Van Driel, you know him, and of course Lubinsky and what's the Vadvani, the new entrepreneurial history. So they ask themselves, well, what is the margin of maneuver of these guys? Yes, as you said, they do not have the helicopter view of the letters. It's coming in, and they can react in a very specific way. It is very, let's say, context dependent, and they have maybe a very specific framing of what is happening, what can be done, and so our judgments to say they're just conservative or risk-taking, that is kind of an absurdity, because it really does not take into account what Werner Plumpe sees as the central thing of the company. It's the decision-making, decisionism, as he says it. He says is the company always has to make decisions, and these decisions, they are usually urgent. They have to be made. If they're not being made, the company will go bankrupt. So the company actually is decision making. So we have to look at it, and that means contextualizing how are decisions made, what is, let's say, flowing into that. And as you said, these letters, yeah, they are a bit tempting, so nice, everything's written down, but in reality, you have to also look, let's say, they do not explain, yeah, I'm writing this letter to you because I'm a German in Paris, I'm doing it because I'm of the Lutheran confession, and I'm writing 40 letters per month because of this and that. It is something that we have to see in this letter, so we have to really interpret within the lines, between the lines, and beyond the lines. And that makes it really a tough thing, I'd say, and that's why I'm so dissatisfied again with business history, not traditional business history. And yeah, I can just kind of promise that I try to take all these aspects into account and try to apply the latest strands of business history to arrive at a complex picture. And that will allow us to see why this company in the end went down. And with that, I go over to your question. You asked basically, why did it go down? And what does it have to do with risk or danger? I was too brief in that regard. I admit that. I plead guilty. My basic argument is we have a conservative model. Now I'm using the term. Some Swiss from St. Gall in Lyon selling Swiss linen, buying French silk. That's it. That's conservative. But they survived. They survived the crisis. So you could say that was the better choice. They didn't take the risk. They survived, they continued. But they continued in a kind of mediocre way. So they never became rich. They just continued a small-scale business. None of these Swiss in Lyon in the 18th century really becomes rich. The one Swiss who become rich in Lyon, they are not in the Swiss nation. These are the Calvinists from Geneva and Neuchâtel. These are the ones that are doing the Spechten-Gonzenbach model. So they are expanding. And that's what I call, I guess my title was not good. Risk minimization via vertical integration. That's not it. It's rationalizing risk via vertical integration. So you expand the market, and that helps you to become too big to fail, to become invulnerable. And in this case, and now I apply the concept of danger, it simply could not be foreseen that this galley from Genoa would spread the plague to Marseille, and that this would result in 1-year quarantine, that the emperor would shut down every trade with France. It could not be foreseen that a Mississippi bubble would burst so dramatically. So at that point, I say that the rational risk-taking had, let's say, the bad luck. I mean, look at the bond market in the United States. That was always the non-risk-taking thing, and now for a few weeks it has become the risky thing. So things can change, even things that have been for decades the non-risky variant. You get my point? And the one merchant who said that this thing of the 1720s was actually a risk, I think you refer to Herbert Lüthi, who was a Swiss historian, who kind of applauded himself and his compatriots of the 18th century, and I argue against that, basically. Okay, I guess these are the two questions, and then the last one is from Tanya. Oh gosh, Luhmann, our good old friend. Well, what can we do with him? Luhmann is complex, we know that, and what I like about his concept is that it makes us problematize the concepts that we're using, because we're using them very easily: risk, danger, conservative, risk aversion, trust. These words are used very easily, but he really goes to the basis of it, and he looks at its constructiveness. He looks at, especially, he says, it is a result of communication. That's the thing. It's the world is communication for him, and the communication builds up systems, and these systems again determine what we conceive as risk and how we construct it. And I like this. Let's say it makes us more sensible to what we're talking about, to the context. Last question: trust. That's a bit, again, it was too implicit in my model. I see networks of trust are the thing that are the prevalent mode of doing long-distance business in pre-modern Europe. I mean, that's very classic. I'm absolutely not daring if I say that. The thing is now, we have the Swiss Reformed networks. They are classic networks, Zollikofen in Marseille, Gonzenbach and St. Gall, that's the classical names. All these names, Jocha, that I cited, they are from that network. That's that world, and it's a closed world. It's a compartmentalized world. Then you have the Lutheran networks. They are strong in Venice. As she said, Zellweger never went to Venice. Why didn't he do so? Well, the Lutherans owned the place. And so they went to Genoa, where there is no Lutherans. So you see, the confessional coding of the networks is, of course, the basis of trust. And at that point, I could argue a little bit, it is a risk mitigation strategy. So if you want to do business with Hamburg, and you are a Swiss in St. Gall, you need the Lutheran, even if he comes from Ravensburg, because being Lutheran means you get access to that web of trust. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yes, dear colleagues and friends, our afternoon session has come to an end. I would like to thank all the three contributors, all the discussants, and the whole of the auditoria. I wish you a wonderful evening here in Prato. Thank you very much. Grazie, arrivederci.